So, the first impression when you look at this is it sounds like 2 employees were fired.
We have breaking news tonight as CTV National News has conducted an internal investigation into the doctored news footage regarding Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and has announced the findings on their Twitter page.
Let's take a look. So before we get into the actual findings, some people may not be aware, or they may have forgotten, or any number of reasons you may not know what we're talking about. But there was a significant incident that actually occurred on September the 22nd. And if you need a quick refresher, take a look.
No wonder distrust in the media is at an all-time high. It's because Canadians are seeing more and more examples of how they twist the truth. But this one takes the cake. I've never seen anything like this. CTV News just got caught creating fake news. They were trying to promote a government talking point, and they took a clip of Pierre Poilievre making a statement about the carbon tax and giving Canadians a carbon tax election, and they spliced it together to do this.
While the continuation of the plan appears safe for now, the events of the last week have raised new questions over the plan's future.
That's why we need to put forward a motion.
The Conservatives announced a non-confidence vote.
That's why it's time to put forward a motion for a carbon tax election. That's why it's time we need to put forward a motion for a carbon.
The Conservatives announced a non-confidence.
Pierre never actually said that sentence. This is the lengths that they'll go to try to protect the Liberals and take your attention off of the carbon tax and all the damage it's doing to Canadians. This is what Conservatives are up against. Not just the Liberals and NDP, but their friends in the media, the bought and paid for parliamentary press gallery that will do everything they can to present Liberal policies in a favorable light and make you believe things that aren't even true about the Conservatives. Next time you see a CTV news broadcast painting Conservatives in a negative light, ask yourself this one question. Did that even really happen?
So, CTV did issue a apology, and this is what that looked like.
So this was from a few days ago. It reads, "Last night in a report on this broadcast, we presented a comment by the official opposition leader Pierre Poilievre that was taken out of context. It left viewers with the impression the Conservative non-confidence motion was to defeat the Liberals' dental care program. In fact, the Conservatives have made it clear the motion is based on a long list of issues with the Liberal government, including the carbon tax. A misunderstanding during the editing process resulted in this misrepresentation. We unreservedly apologize to Mr. Poilievre and the Conservative Party of Canada. We regret this report went to air in the manner it did."
Would CTV just, let this be? Well, one of our viewers actually emailed us the fact that they tried to contact CTV based on their mailbox. And they let us know that CTV's mailbox was full.
So I bet a lot of Canadians were contacting CTV upset about the way they misrepresented this news. Now, they weren't the only ones that were upset, because the Conservative Party of Canada was upset as well, instructing their MPs and I believe other staff members not to engage with CTV News.
Right. Let me just read something to you because we reached out to our sources, and the question that was asked was that we've heard unverified rumors that Pierre has banned the party from going on CTV. Is that true? Response: yes. And my response was unsurprising. And their response was, or talking to anyone, reporters, Bell Media, lobbyists, etc., until we get an apology. So that is what was actually going on. So you now had the CTV News channel, who is right now reporting on some of the biggest news going on right now, which is in Parliament, and now unable to engage with anyone from the official opposition, soon to be
the government party.
The government.
I mean, and the timeline of events was that this was after CTV's quote-unquote apology. So the first apology was not good enough, and the Conservatives let them know it was not good enough and that they would not be engaging further if they didn't receive a proper apology.
Well, and so subsequently they've done a second investigation, which actually makes their first apology that much worse. So we'll come back to that, but here is the updated apology.
Statement from CTV National News, September 26th, 2024. CTV National News today issued the following statement regarding a report on its September 22nd, 2024 broadcast. A report on Sunday's CTV National News broadcast did not meet our expected and required high editorial standards. We sincerely and unreservedly apologize for the manner this report went to air and the false impression it created. As is standard practice, we conducted an investigation to determine whether a breach of our editorial policies and practices has occurred in this case. The investigation found that 2 members of the CTV News team are responsible for altering a video clip, manipulating it for a particular story. Their actions violate our editorial standards and are unacceptable. Those individuals are no longer members of the CTV News team. Our duty to provide accurate, fair, and balanced coverage of the issues that matter to Canadians, and to do so fully independently, is one of the utmost importance to us. We will continue our work to earn the trust of the millions of Canadians who turn to CTV News each and every day.
So, the first impression when you look at this is it sounds like 2 employees were fired. Now, some people are speculating, well, maybe they weren't fired, maybe they were just moved. Well, that's a possibility. It depends. It depends on what actually happened. If 2 people actually did breach their editorial practices and it was 2 rogue employees, they were probably fired. Now, it's interesting that 2 employees were actually singled out. So one of the employees should have been an editor, because they would have been the one to actually manipulate the footage. And the second employee, I imagine, was the screener, the one who actually views the footage and okays it to go to air. Now, depending on CTV structure, because I haven't worked at CTV, I used to work at Global News way back in the day, it depends if there's anybody else that reviews the footage and approves the entire story prior to it going to air.
Well, I imagine it would. You can't just have an editor and a screener deciding what the nation is going to hear.
Well, you would expect that the reporter that actually, did the story and reported on it was the one who approved it. Now, maybe they're the ones who screened it and they're the ones who actually approved it. We don't know, because they actually don't name names in here, and organizations don't do that.
So from our experience with reporters, when we were participating in an interview, the person who was taking the footage was also the person who was presenting it on the air, and also the person who was doing the editing.
Correct, in that case. Now, it wasn't a news organization as large as CTV, but there's an example nonetheless. So it all depends on what was going on here. And usually an editor is going to kind of, green light the story and see it before it goes. Now, the catch is that the editor may not know what was spliced together. They may just be looking at the story and say, okay, that looks fine, out it goes. So it all depends on what had happened here. So let's go back to the original apology now. So the issue that I have, there's a couple of them. Number 1, it says, last night in a report on this broadcast, we presented a comment by the official opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, that was taken out of context. So that's the first problem that I have, because it's false. What that implies is that Pierre's comment was taken out of context, which isn't what happened.
No, it was created out of thin air.
Right.
Like you saw in Andrew Scheer's video, that phrase, that sentence was never spoken by Pierre. It was taken from different voice clips and mashed together.
Let's take a look at the second part. A misunderstanding during the editing process resulted in this misrepresentation. So to me, sounds like they did an initial investigation and they found, it was a misunderstanding. So evidently, after they had this outcry and they saw the reaction from the Conservatives, they then went back and actually did a proper investigation? Or did they find two people to just put their heads on a platter in order to satisfy the masses? We don't know.
Well, here's my theory. My theory is that whoever wrote that initial tweet was just using some flowery language to try to get this resolved as quickly as possible. And then when that didn't satisfy is perhaps when they went looking and did an actual investigation.
Now, here's what I think probably happened. And it's close to what Tanya's saying. They're not going to be able to keep people that actually do good work at CTV News if CTV operates in an extremely dishonest way, like what happened on the 22nd. So it's in CTV's best interest to find out what happened here. So I think the initial chat from CTV went to probably the reporter who covered the story, helped, with the editing. And when they said, what the heck happened here? And then the reporter said, well, it was a misunderstanding in editing, and, Johnny, misinterpreted what I said, and that's what happened. So that's probably how the original tweet happened. And then everything blew up, and then they went back and they said, wait a minute, this is not a misunderstanding. What actually happened? And then they probably identified that a hyper-partisan person had an idea to try and influence what that story was, and then that ended up in the modified footage. That's a possibility of what happened. It sounds like that's what CTV is putting forth as what happened. And is it possible they just, moved two people along? Unlikely. They probably would have fired those people, and with cause, if they actually did breach their editorial process, because that actually violates some standards of journalism, which you actually have to be very careful about. And CTV is also not CBC, everybody. So I am giving them a little bit more credit, a little bit more. But this is what I think happened. The issue is that we're not going to know exactly what happened with this, because as with any HR investigation in any organization, all they do is basically say, we've looked into it, we've removed the employees, that's all we're saying, and that's all you're going to hear. So, but it's interesting that CTV did act on this relatively quickly, and I will give credit where credit's due. It is most likely you Canadians, because of your outcry, your relentless emails that filled up their entire guest email box, that let CTV know that they're going to have even more viewership problems than they already do. And the Conservatives let them know that you're going to be missing out on a lot of news when the Conservative government takes power if you actually don't get your act together and find out what happened. The question for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives is this going to be enough to lift the boycott? We'll have to see.